Well, shalom, my friends, and welcome to our video Bible study series on the Gospel of John. So today, our study is going to be in the 18th chapter of the Gospel of John. So please bear with me as we go through my preliminary PowerPoint material to get a little background of where we've been so far and where we're headed now. So the summary material we've been using is from the Dake Annotated Reference Bible, which places the date of the writing of the Gospel of John in the last decade of the first century, sometime in the 90s. Dake says the place is unknown, and I guess technically it probably is. My best guess is that John, the apostle, wrote from Ephesus. He was the bishop there for many years. Also, the author is John the beloved disciple. He was the brother of James and fishing colleagues with Peter and Andrew. It seems like they were partners in the fishing business, but then they kind of bailed out on that and became full-time followers of Yeshua. For the rest of this material, we've covered it in earlier videos, so I'm just going to suggest if you want to look up some of these Bible passages, pause the video, give yourself time to look up some of this stuff here. But we will continue on for our video purposes. I've been showing a map of biblical era, first century Jerusalem and surrounding areas, um, just to give you kind of a map perspective of where these events took place. The Last Supper of Yeshua, of Jesus and his disciples, took place in the house of the Last Supper. I think I've showed you some pictures of like the modern day tourist place where pilgrims are shown that Yeshua met with his disciples in this big room. And also the tomb of King David is like down in the basement of that building. It's where the Tower of David is now. Yeah, this was called the Essene Quarter, so it would be a hangout spot for Nazarenes and Essenes, of which Yeshua, Jesus, was the preeminent leader of the Nazarenes. So yeah, starting in John 13 and 14, most of that content takes place in the upper room. And then at the end of chapter 14, it seems like the disciples left the upper room and started heading for Gethsemane. So they may have stopped along the way. There will be a verse in the text that we'll look at today that will give us the impression that they left somewhere, like they had left the upper room and then went someplace else and then left there and continued on to Gethsemane. But the events of today's study will take place in the Garden of Gethsemane. So my guess is that after they left the upper room, they would have come to the Essene Gate, which is right here in the wall of the city, gone out to this road that leads through the Hinnom Valley, up the Kidron Valley, towards kind of the foot of the mountain range of the Mount of Olives, which is down here kind of at the lower slope of the Mount of Olives. So Gethsemane is where the stuff is happening in our study for today. Let me get rid of my face here for a moment. We've been looking at a chronology, like a chronological harmony of the Gospels. This is just a portion of the much larger harmony of the Gospels, but for this portion, we started out in John's Gospel with Jesus washing the disciples' feet. That's the first 20 verses of chapter 13. The betrayal announced at the Lord's Supper, that was verses 21 through 30. The Lord's Supper instituted. Now, that is told in all three of what's called the Synoptic Gospels, but John doesn't say a thing about it. And my guess is that probably because he had already read the other Gospels, which I think undoubtedly were written prior to John's writing his Gospel. So he knew there was plenty of information about that, so had nothing more to say about it. Then prophecy of Peter's denial. We'll be getting into that tonight. Chapter 13, verses 31 to 38. A controversy over greatness, which John doesn't mention. Another prophecy of Peter's denial, which John also doesn't mention. Jesus encouraging the disciples in mission work, also not mentioned by John. But then the last chapter we studied, chapter 17, includes the prayer, usually called the high priestly prayer of Yeshua on behalf of his disciples, both those that were present that evening and those who would become disciples as a result of their outreach and their mission work. So that's chapters 14 through 1726. And then tonight's chapter, this day's chapter is at Gethsemane. And the three synoptic gospels give us quite a bit of information about it, as does John's gospels. So we will talk about what happens at Gethsemane. We will also talk about the arrest and the trials that Jesus experienced. And again, this is in all four of the Gospels. It goes from chapter 18, verse 12 into chapter 19, which we will not do in this video. So chapter 19 stuff will be in the next video. So let's continue on with our text for study today. So here we have the Accordance Bible software program. And although this isn't my favorite Bible software, I like this one because it allows me in these videos and in my ordinary studies to look at four reference materials at the same time. I think I can even add some more uh, windows, panels with additional references. But I think that would be too squished on the computer screen. So here we've got the New King James Bible, which is my go-to version. I prefer the majority text of the Greek New Testament to the more critical text, the Egyptian, relying heavily on the Egyptian manuscripts and so forth. So I prefer the New King James version. I love the Old King James version, but it's difficult to teach from. Then we have the Nestle Aland 28th edition of the Greek New Testament, and this is a critical Greek New Testament. But I like to use this one because it has an apparatus, which is some additional information about manuscript differences and omissions in some of the manuscripts. So we can look at a little background, which we will do a little bit of that in this video. Then I've got a Hebrew language New Testament. This is not original from the first century. The one we're looking at here is the Delitzsch, Franz Delitzsch translation of the New Testament into biblical era Hebrew language, and he did that translation directly from the Greek New Testament. And I believe that was from the majority text. The Delitzsch did that. He lived in the 1800s, and these critical texts, well, I guess they were popular at that time. But the one we're actually going to refer to mainly this evening is the modern Hebrew language New Testament from the Israeli Bible Society. And this is modern Hebrew, which is similar to biblical Hebrew, but it's got a lot of kind of modern terms that were not known and were not used in the biblical era. So we've got that if we want to look at it. And then we've got the commentary from Dake's Annotated Reference Bible. And there may be a couple of places we'll want to take a look at that. So let's go. John 18, verse 1. When Yeshua had spoken these words, what would those words be? That would be the high priestly prayer, the prayer that takes up almost all, if not all of, John chapter 17. So when he had finished the prayer, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden. That'll be the Garden of Gethsemane, which he and his disciples entered. So the term went out, ex aelthen, is a Greek word that has the idea of like leaving, almost like leaving a building, like going outside of a building to a new destination, from going from one destination to another. So if we just go by that Greek term, which after all is an inspired term in our Greek New Testament, we might want to come to the conclusion that after Jesus and the disciples left the upper room, they went somewhere else, and we wouldn't have any idea where that was. It could have been uh, just a gathering area, like a little park or something like that. Um, or it could have been another building, something like that. So here again, Dake reminds us that in John chapter 14, verse 31, if you look down here in the information window, it says, and remember this is from John chapter 14, which takes place in the upper room, but that the world may know that I love the Father and the Father gave me commandment, so I do. And then he says, rise, let us go from here. So based on that verse, that's why I say at that point, they left the upper room. So John chapters 15, 16, and 17 take place outside of the upper room, maybe in some other location, maybe just on the road as they are going out. So it was John that told us that they left the upper room in chapter 14, and it's John that's telling us that they went out from wherever they were after that. And over the brook Kidron, that is that little river valley that runs between the city of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives on the east. And there was a garden there which he and his disciples entered. And I think this was a familiar place to the disciples. It's a lovely place you can still visit, a very peaceful and serene place. It's great for prayer, and that's what Jesus was intending to do here. He was going to the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew prophetically uh, what to anticipate, and we'll see what's going to happen there. But I think he prophetically knew that and was very distressed about it. We can sometimes get the idea that because Yeshua was who he was the Son of God, that he wouldn't get upset or bent out of shape or worried about anything, but knowing what was going to befall him. And he'd been predicting this for months. We're going to Jerusalem. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of sinners, and they're going to kill him. They're going to crucify him. But on the third day, he would rise from the dead. So his heart is heavy, and we will see that in the events of John chapter 18 here. So he and his disciples go into the garden. And Yehuda, Judas, that would be Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Yeshua often met there with his Talmidim. Um, Before we go on, let's talk a little bit about Yehuda, Judas's plans to betray the master. The temple authorities, the religious leaders of the Pharisees and Sadducees and so forth, had been plotting for some time, certainly since the raising of Lazarus, but probably even before that, to arrest Jesus, accuse him of some crime, and then put him to death. And So, but the timetable that they had established for that was that they would not do it during the Passover holiday. It's like a Passover, and then there's a week-long feast of unleavened bread. So they weren't going to do it during that week or 8-day period of time, because Yeshua had so many followers that they didn't want to start a riot. They didn't want um, turmoil in the streets and things like that. They really kind of wanted to do this secretly. So they were going to wait however long they needed to until an appropriate time after the holiday. But Yeshua had other plans. He went to Jerusalem on purpose because he knew these things were prophesied. He knew they were going to happen, and they needed to happen on the day of Passover. Now, Yeshua and his disciples already celebrated the Passover like earlier this same evening. Like when the sun set, they celebrated a Nazarene and Essene version of the Passover meal. It was a little bit different because if they were faithful Nazarenes and Essenes, then animal sacrifices were not involved with this meal. It would have been a Melchizedekian Passover meal, which was, Abraham met Melchizedek when he was returning from rescuing his nephew Lot, and Melchizedek, the king of Salem and the king of righteousness, came out to meet him and brought gifts of bread and wine. And that's what we see in the Passover celebration of Yeshua and his disciples. And then other things we learn about Melchizedek is that he had no parents and he had no beginning or end. So Melchizedek sounds a lot like Yeshua. And here's Yeshua doing a Nazarene, a Melchizedekian priesthood-like Passover. So that has happened. But Yeshua kind of surprises Judas because Judas has already made arrangements with the religious leaders to betray him at some future time after the holiday. But Jesus is insisting that this happen. So at the meal, once Judas is identified, at least privately, as the betrayer, Jesus says to him, what you're going to do, go and do it now. And I think Yehuda was a little stymied by that. First of all, that Yeshua knew already that he was going to do it, and secondly, that it's happening now when the Pharisees and Sadducees didn't want it to happen. Which begs the question, who was in charge of these events? Was it Judas? Was it the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were making all these plans to arrest and kill Jesus? No. They were pawns in Yeshua's plan, in God the Father's plan to redeem the world by the death of his son. So Yeshua made sure that these things happened when they happened at the appropriate time. Passover for the Pharisees and Sadducees was the next day because there were two different calendars going on. And there was a 1 day difference. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the temple activities would be based on the lunar calendar, which was in effect with those groups. And then the Essenes and Nazarenes used the solar calendar. So there's a 1 day difference. So it would be like Tuesday evening into Wednesday, Yeshua celebrates the Passover with his disciples in the upper room. The next day, as the sun starts to go down, he is the Passover sacrifice. He is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So Yehuda leaves the upper room and goes to the religious leaders and says, if you guys are going to get Jesus, you're going to have to take him now. Because like the jig is up for me. Yeshua knows that I'm the betrayer and that I'm going to do it. So if you're gonna move on Yeshua, you got to do it now. So Yeah, Yehuda, who betrayed him, also knew the place. Like I say, it was a common gathering place, like a prayer garden for Yeshua and the disciples. For Yeshua often met there with his Talmidim. So that's where Yehuda was. He Yehuda knew that Yeshua would be taking his disciples there because that's like what he always did. And so he's going to lead Yeshua's enemies there to that garden. Then Yehuda, having received a detachment of troops and officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. So let's talk a little bit about a detachment of troops. Okay. A detachment of troops in the Greek New Testament is a speiron. A speiron. I think in other translations of the English, in the English Bible, it's called a cohort. So if we go over to Dake's commentary material here, let's see what Dake says about a speira. It's a military cohort of 600 men. And if you look it up on Google or AI something or other, that's what it is. So it is 4 or 5 or 6 centuries, which was a military unit of 100 foot soldiers, warriors. This cohort was accompanied by officers of the chief priests. Everything that Dake said there is correct. I'm just not so sure that the text tells us it was a speiron, which would lead us to assume this was a group of Roman soldiers. But I don't think it was. I don't think these were Roman soldiers. I think these were Israeli soldiers. Um, Oftentimes, a ruler, like a king or a prime minister or something like that, will have what's called a Republican Guard or a palace guard of troops, which could be called a speiron, but it wouldn't necessarily be all 600 men. It would be whatever the palace guard, whatever military protective unit, whatever would be appropriate. And I think these were not Roman soldiers. And as we go through this chapter, I will try to illustrate why I think that. So I think these were Israeli soldiers, maybe 100 of them, maybe a century of them. But see, Israelis didn't call their centuries because that's a Greek word. So they would have had like a chayil or a what else could it be? A sar hamea of 100 troops or something like that. In which case, I think speiron would be an okay word to use to describe military troops. But bottom line here is I think we're talking about Israeli soldiers that served probably Herod, who was sort of like the king of the Jews. He was the ruler assigned by the Roman Empire to govern 1/4 of the kingdom. Pontius Pilate was really the ruler of Jerusalem. He had been for about 3 years at this point. Uh, so it wouldn't have been his Praetorian Guard unless, like the Israeli Defense Force provided him with provided Pilate with a palace guard when he was in Jerusalem. See, most of the time, Pilate spent in Caesarea out on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. But he did come to Jerusalem for the feasts because there were big crowds of people there and he wanted to make sure that order was maintained. So I'm just going to suggest, and probably the verbal evidence is against me. I'm going to suggest that these were Israeli troops, Hayalim. Um, And in addition to that, in addition to the spera, were the officers, the huparetes from the chief priests. Now, this word huparetes is an interesting word too. This is a Greek word. The Hebrew word is sharatim. Sharatim. A sharat is a servant. And these would be like servant leaders. But the Greek word is the interesting word. It's translated officers, I think in all of ours, officers, but also servant or assistant. So it's translated officers here. The word huparetes is a compound word. Hupa, the first part of it, means under. And the last part of it, retas, is a rower, an oarsman. So a huparetes was a under rower, somebody on a warship usually, who would be seated in like benches below decks, close to the water line, with oars that would stick out a window in the ship. And like each oarsman would have an oar, and they would provide propulsion for these Roman warships or Greek warships as well. If you've ever seen the old movie Ben-Hur, I think that movie's been redone, but the one with Charlton Heston, where Charlton Heston is a Yehuda Ben-Hur is his name in the movie, and he's a Jewish nobleman who's friends with a Roman soldier, but the Roman soldier turns on him and sells him into slavery, and he becomes a huparetes. He is on a Roman warship rowing into battle. And in the battle that Ben-Hur is in, his ship is defeated, and he would most likely die. He would probably go down with the ship because they were chained to the ship, so they couldn't get away. But the Lord arranges for Ben-Hur to get out of his shackles on the ship, and Ben-Hur ends up rescuing the captain of the Roman warship, and the Roman adopts him. So that's a long story to tell you about huparetes, I guess, plural, under rowers. So here, I think the word just means an officer of the chief priest. But literally the word means under rower. So here is an example of a Greek word that means under rower, but it's used in a different sense, just like I think speron is used in a different sense. I think these would be Israeli Defense Force people. I'm joking about that. Israeli Defense Force is a modern Israeli military organization. But the equivalent from the biblical era would be military troops of Israel, who would serve the leadership, including the priests and the Pharisees. They came to Gethsemane there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Yeshua, therefore, verse 4, Yeshua, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him. And again, I think this was by prophecy. Um, Yeshua would not have been able to prophesy without the spiritual gift of prophecy. Because remember, in order to become a human being to redeem the world, he emptied himself of his divine attributes, one of which would be omniscience, all knowledge. So this is prophecy by means of prophecy, which could come either directly from the Holy Spirit or just from reading the Bible. From reading the Old Testament, Yeshua would have known what was on the horizon for him, what the Father's plan for him was. So, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" Good grammar there, Yeshua. They answered him, "Yeshua of Nazareth," except that that's not what they said. Now, if you've been watching my videos long enough, you know that I make way too big a deal out of this term, Yezun. This is Greek. Yezun, ton, the Nazarion, the Nazarene. And most scholars, I mean, even Greek lexicons say that this is a reference to a Nazarene. Their understanding is they're a follower, a Nazarene is a follower of Yeshua because he's from Nazareth. This word doesn't have anything to do, well, I mean, it's the the root word of this word, netzer, means a branch. And so the town, Nazareth, and the group, Nazarenes, have a similar root word. But look at this word Nazareth. It has a T or a TH on the end. There is no T in this Greek word. So the city of Nazareth was named after the Nazarenes because Nazarenes lived there. The Nazarenes had been in existence for 150 years before Jesus came on the scene. So Nazarenes were not followers of Yeshua until they became his followers. There were Nazarenes before there was a Yeshua in human flesh. And there's plenty of historical evidence about that and so forth. So Nazarion means Yeshua the Nazarene, not from Nazareth. If you wanted to say Yezun, if you wanted to say Yeshua from Nazareth, you would say Yezun Apo Nazaret. And there's a T on the end of Nazaret. That's the name of the town. Okay. So this is Nazariah. If we go over here to our Hebrew language New Testament, the modern Hebrew translation we get is Yeshua mi Nazrat. The mi is short for min, which means from, and then here is Nazrat with a T on the end, the name of the city of Nazareth. So this modern Hebrew New Testament is going along with all the Greek scholars who say that Nazarion means Nazareth, but it doesn't. Let me switch just briefly to the Delitzsch Hebrew New Testament. And how does Delitzsch render this? He says, Yeshua ha-Notzri. That's how you say Jesus the Nazarene in biblical era Hebrew and also in modern language Hebrew. So the Israeli Bible Society use of Min Natzarat is just wrong for one thing, but it's a choice they've made to go along with the Greek scholars who render it that way in English and other things. So they answered him, we're looking for Yeshua HaNotzri, Jesus the Nazarene. And Yeshua said to them, it might be interesting for you to like go on eSword, which is a Bible software, a free online Bible software program, and just look up in the comparisons how all the different versions of the English New Testament translate this. I don't know if any of them get it right. Now, if you're interested in following up on this, the first book that I wrote called Yeshua, He Will Be Called a Nazarene. It's available on Amazon, and it gives the whole history of the Essenes and the Nazarenes, and then Yeshua's life and ministry. So you can get that book from, and I go into great detail, even more detail than this, uh, to uh, to show that I'm right about this Yeshua the Nazarene. So Yeshua said to them, I am he. Now, that is an interesting term in the Greek because it is this term ego eimi. And I think we've talked about this in the earlier chapters of John's Gospel. Yeshua sometimes uses this term with reference to himself, ego eimi. I am the bread of life. I am the good shepherd. And many Greek scholars believe that this phrase, ego eimi, is a reference to Exodus chapter 3, where um, where God reveals his name, the sacred name, to Moses in the burning. Moses isn't in the burning bush. They're at the burning bush. And when God says his name in Hebrew, he says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, I am that I am. Now, when the Hebrew Old Testament was translated into the Greek language in about the third century BC, so third century before Yeshua, the Greek translators translated Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh with ego eimi, which has led them to believe that this is the way the Septuagint and the Greek New Testament renders that sacred name. And actually, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh is a first person singular rendering of the sacred name, and only God can say it. If you say it, or if I say it, then we're saying, I am that I am. I am the eternal God. When Moses tells the Israelites what his name is, the name God gives him to tell the Israelites is Yahweh, which is a Hifil imperfect version of the same Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh. It's just has a yod prefix and is a way of saying he is. He always was, he is now, and he will be forevermore. Okay, so this may be a reference to the sacred name. So let's see what happens. Yeshua says to them, I am he. And Yehuda, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now, when Yeshua said to them, Ego eimi, or Ehyeh asher Ehyeh, they drew back and fell to the ground. So um, I don't know if Jesus was speaking Greek then. I think it's unlikely. He was probably speaking Hebrew, and he probably said, Ehyeh asher Ehyeh, I am he. That's the sacred name that only God can say. We can say Yahweh, he is, but only Yeshua can say Ehyeh asher Ehyeh. And when he says that, they drew back and fell to the ground. So he bowled them over. Drew back is op eilthen. That means to go from someplace. Nasog, I'm unfamiliar with that. It means the same thing as going back. I'm just unfamiliar with the root of this modern Hebrew word esog. Uh, so it's like they stumble backwards and they fall over. So what? 100 or maybe 600 military troops fall over when Yeshua tells them who he is. Then he asks them again, whom are you seeking? Now, you would think that they would have learned their lesson and wouldn't have said it again, wouldn't have answered that question again. And they said, Yeshua HaNotzri. It's the same here as it was a couple of verses earlier. Jesus the Nazarene. Yeshua answered them, I have told you that I am he, ego eimi. Now, this time they don't fall over. Yeshua goes on to say, therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. So, if you're here to arrest me, then arrest me, but let my disciples go free because they haven't done anything wrong. Well, I haven't done anything wrong either. But if you're here to arrest me, I'll stand trial. I'll do what's necessary in your plan and in the Father's plan. But he wants the disciples to be allowed to go free. That the saying, the reason he said that was because the disciples were innocent of any crimes, but also to fulfill prophecy. That the saying might be fulfilled, which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. So if there's any violence that is about to happen, Yeshua's okay with it being on him because that is part of Father's plan, but he doesn't want his disciples to get injured or perhaps even killed because the Bible said, the Old Testament said, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. Um, then Shimon Petros. Shimon Petros. Um, the modern Hebrew language New Testament uses the name Shimon Kepha. Kepha is just the Hebrew version of Petros. Petros means a rock, and that's what Kepha means also. But many of these followers of Yeshua had a Hebrew name and a Greek name. Uh, so let's take Saul of Tarsus, who later becomes the Apostle Paul. Shaul was his Hebrew name, probably his given name, but he also had the name Paulos, which is a Greek name, which means small or kind of insignificant. Paul may have been born with that name. Peter may have been born with the name Shimon Petros. We know that Yeshua called him Petros. So maybe Yeshua gave him that name. He may have given it to him in the Greek language, or he may have given it to him in the Hebrew language. So Delitzsch, in his Hebrew New Testament, calls him Shimon Petros. We can go over and look at that, but I hope you'll just take my word for it. And Delitzsch also calls Paulos Paulos. He calls Paul Paulos. Okay, then Shimon Petros, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Malchus. Okay. Now, let's look at Dake's commentary here. Jesus has already talked about swords. I think this very evening he said, if you guys don't already have some swords, you may need to sell a jacket or something and get yourself some swords. And they say, well, we've got two swords here. Okay, Jesus says that's enough. And he smote Pio and cut off his right ear. Now, uh, the right ear of this servant whose name was Malchus. Perhaps Malchus advanced to seize the Lord, to seize Yeshua. So Peter, intending to cleave his skull, in other words, to cut his head off or split it in two, but God, no doubt, permitted only the ear to be severed so as to cause another great miracle and further convince the soldiers that they were powerless to act without his consent. So again, who's in charge here? It's Yeshua. He's being arrested, but he's still in charge of the events that take place here. Malchus is named only here in John's gospel. John alone gives the name of this servant who smote him, but he does not mention the healing of the ear, as Luke does. Luke 22:51 says, Jesus answered and said, permit even this. And he touched his ear and healed him. So Peter either cut his ear off or just mangled it, and Yeshua touched his ear or picked it up and put it back on and healed him. So Luke tells us about that. Luke's a doctor, so he's going to be interested in these surgical procedures, even the supernatural ones. Um, but one of the things that we're going to learn about John, the author of this gospel, is that he was known to the high priest. And he also knew this servant. That's how he's able to provide the name. Now, I know John is writing by inspiration, so God could tell him the servant's name. But I think he already knew it because he knew the high priest and he knew this servant. Um, these servants of the high priest could have been wearing helmets, so it may have been when Peter's sword came down on Malchus's head that it kind of slid down the side of his head, and his ear was sticking out the ear hole and got lacerated. So anyway, Peter said, "Hey, I'll fight for you and die for you. There's no way I'm going to betray you." So, Peter is living up to his boasts, at least at this point. Verse 11. So Yeshua said to Peter, put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me? Now, this is kind of a mild rebuke, but what Jesus is saying here to Peter is, let me paraphrase the Lord. I think I think Yeshua is saying, Peter, I appreciate your loyal to me and I understand what you're trying to do. But by doing what you're trying to do, are you trying to prevent me from being arrested and beat to a pulp and die on a cross for the forgiveness of the sins of the whole world? If that's what you're trying to do, stop trying to do that. That's why I came to this earth. So I think he appreciates Peter's loyalty and courage at this point. The courage isn't going to last, but at this point, Peter's ready to fight. If there are 600 people here and Peter with his 12 buddy or with his 11 buddies is going to take on 600, that's a pretty brave thing. If it's a smaller group than that, let's say it's 100 or even 50 or even 20 or 30, that's still pretty brave. So put your sword into its sheath, so I not drink the cup which the Father, the cup being this sacrifice of himself for redemption of the world. Then the detachment of troops. So here we have spera again. And the word troops, see, the word troops is an indication that the New King James translators believe these are Roman troops. So they call them troops. And I'm looking at the Hebrew to see if what they use here. I'm not even going to go there. So then the detachment of troops, the Speiron, and the captain and the officers, the Huparete, the under rowers of the Yehudim, arrested Yeshua and bound him. Now, of the Yehudim can refer to the captain and the officers, but it can also um, refer to the detachment of troops, Israeli troops, IDF troops. So here we've got a captain, a Kiliarchos, which is a leader of 1,000, um, which would be part of a Speiron in Roman terms. In Israeli terms, it might be something else. So I don't know. As I'm saying this, I'm probably thinking whoever's watching this video is thinking I'm wrong about the Roman troops. So that may be true. We'll go on here. And they led him away. They led Yeshua away to Anah or Anan. Hanan in Hebrew. Hanan. Okay, that's interesting. That's the word for grace. Hanan. And even in Greek, it's got the rough breathing accent here, so it should be Hanan, which is just a Greek transliteration of the Hebrew. So this should be Hanan. Now, this is part of the difficulty we get in with Hebrew names in English, because when the Greek translates Hanan into Greek, it uses the rough breathing, Hanan. But when some Greek scholars look at this name, they just use the A-N-N-A-N, and that's why we get Annas or Anan. The N, the noon, what is it in Greek? Nu, the nu, at the end of this word is just an indication that it's in the accusative case. If Hanan was the subject of the sentence, then it would be Hanas, as it may be later on in this text. So they led him away first to Hanan, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. So Hanan was the kind of the retired high priest. He was a real wheeler dealer, and he was kind of a master of using the temple what institution to buy and sell a lot of sacrificial animals and souvenirs and stuff like that and make a fortune. So Hanan was very rich, but he had retired. I think the Romans retired him. And then I believe there was a series of sons and sons-in-law. So Caiapha in our modern Hebrew there is actually an Aramaic name, which it may well have been. So Caiapha, the aleph ending identifies that as a Aramaic name versus a Hebrew name. And Caiapha here in Greek was his father-in-law. So Caiaphas was married to Annas's daughter. And Caiaphas was the high priest that year. So he was the serving high priest. But for most people, Hanan was the guy who was mainly in charge. So Caiaphas had a lot of responsibility and not a lot of privilege, I guess. Now it was that Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Now, I want to go over here to Dake's commentary and just bring up his reference here from John chapter 11. Remember, John chapter 11 was the story of the raising of Lazarus. And going down here to the information window, we have John 11:49 to 52. And this is talking about a meeting of the Sanhedrin, I think. And one of the members of the Sanhedrin, Caiaphas, being high priest that year, said to them, to his fellow religionists, to his fellow Pharisees and Sadducees, you know nothing at all, nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. Now, we know what he meant by that. What he meant by that was, if this Yeshua is allowed to go free and do what he's been doing, he is going to win a lot of people over to his side, and there is going to be like a civil war among the Jews here, and the Romans are going to come and squash Yeshua, and squash all of his enemies, and in so doing, the whole nation will perish. Well, the whole nation ended up perishing anyway. But what this means prophetically is that it was God's plan that one man should die for the people. Yes, the Jewish people, but the people of the whole world. Everybody is a sinner. And so prophetically, Caiaphas didn't even know what he was saying prophetically, but here he's talking about the gospel, that one man, Yeshua, who is also the Son of God, died for the whole world of people, and not that the whole nation should perish. So Caiaphas says, if we kill Yeshua, in doing so, we're going to save our nation, and the Romans won't squash us. Well, they ended up squashing them already. Anyway, now this he did not say of his own authority. The word authority is not in the Greek text. So what the Greek text actually says is he did not say this on his own. But being high priest that year, he prophesied that Yeshua would die for the nation, and not for that nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. So that's it's a very significant statement by Caiaphas. And we talked about it in John chapter 11, but I wanted to talk about it again here, because here you have an enemy of the Son of God who is being inspired to prophesy and say profound truth that even he doesn't understand. Okay, verse 15. And Shimon Petros, Simon Peter, followed Yeshua, and so did another disciple. So here's another example of how this is John, But John doesn't identify himself by name. He doesn't say Jesus, Simon Peter, and John. He says another disciple. That's his humble way of like leaving his name out of stuff. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and went with Yeshua into the courtyard of the high priest. So Yohanan, John, the author of this gospel, this gospel, this gospel was known to the high priest, either Annas or Caiaphas or both of them. Uh, so he went ahead on in because he was an acquaintance of the priests. But Petros stood at the door outside. Then the other Talmud, the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, Yohanan, went out and spoke to her who kept the door, to the doorkeeper, and brought Petros in. Then the servant girl, and like, what is a servant girl here in Paidiske? A paidiske is usually like a young person. So the doorkeeper would be, I don't know, maybe a teenager or something like that, the keeper of the door. She said to Petros, "You are not also one of this man, Yeshua's Talmidim disciples, are you?" And he said, "I am not." Okay. Denial, betrayal, number one. How many did Yeshua predict? Before the cock crows, you'll deny me three times. So there's the first one. Now the servants, see what this word for servants is. The douloi. It's not huporetes, it's not the under rowers, but it's the douloi. So the douloi and the officers, that's the huporetai. That's the huporetai. So maybe some of these are people who are out of the group who have brought Yeshua to the high priests. So the huporetai are now in the courtyard of the high priest, who had made a fire of coals, stood there for it was cold, and they warmed themselves. So Passover is in the spring. It's like what, mid-April? And so it's still cold, and especially at night. This is happening in the middle of the night. So the sun has been down for a long time. We've had how many chapters of John's Gospel? 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. We're on the sixth chapter. So all that teaching all the time in the Garden of Gethsemane. Um, Interestingly, the prayers of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane are not mentioned by John, but they are mentioned in the other Gospels. So maybe that's why John left them out. So it's still cold at night there, and this is the middle of the night. So they warmed themselves, and Petros stood with them and warmed himself. The high priest then asked Yeshua about his disciples and his doctrine, Didache, his teachings, his Torah, his Torah. Yeshua had his own Torah. We talk about the Torah or the law of Moses. There's also a Torah of Yeshua, of Jesus. So Moses is the what? The mediator of, not mediator. He was the instrument that God used to communicate the law of Moses to the people. Yeshua is the instrument that God used to the people of the Old Testament era. Moses gave the Torah of the law of Moses to the Old Testament people. Yeshua is the instrument that God used to give the Torah of Yeshua to the New Testament people. That's a big subject. I don't have enough time to talk about it now. Uh, the high priest then asked about his disciples about his doctrine. Yeshua answered him, I spoke openly to the world. So Jesus' teachings were in public. They were not in secluded areas, hidden gathering areas and stuff like that. Yeshua was very public in his teaching. He says, I always taught in the synagogues and in the temple where the Yehudim always meet, and in secret I have said nothing. Now, he explained some things to his disciples, but he didn't give them any teachings, any doctrine that he didn't give basically to the whole world. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. Indeed, they know what I said. So, um, like normally, if you ask somebody, like, what are your teachings? The answer you get from that person is going to be something that will be acceptable to you. So, Yeshua here is saying, if you think I might water down what my teachings are or give you a different version than I've given to the world, then ask people who heard me, because I said those things publicly. They know what I taught, and it may be controversial, but they can what confirm that those are my teachings. And when he had said these things, one of the officers who stood by struck Yeshua with the palm of his hand, saying, "Do you answer the high priest like that?" So one of the officers, one of the hupareton, who was there when Jesus said that, struck Yeshua with the palm of his hand. So he just hit him up the side of the head. So one of these huparetai is striking Jesus for what that huparete, what that servant of the high priest believes is insulting or disrespecting to the high priest. So he hits him. Do you answer the high priest like that? So here's another reason. I don't think these huparetai are Romans, because the Romans wouldn't know or wouldn't care who the high priest was, and they might even be the ones doing the insulting. So when he had said these things, we already did that, verse 23. Then Yeshua answered and said, if I've spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if what I'm saying is okay, then why do you strike me? Then Hanan sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest, the active duty high priest. Now Shimon Petros stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, you are not also one of the Talmidim, are you? Of the disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. So you might think, well, this is just kind of reduplication. This is redundant because this conversation already happened. Now, in that case, it was one servant girl. Here, it's in the plural. Um, uh, so uh, they said a pawn. And he denied it and said, I am not. So that's denial number two. Then verse 26, one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him, so one of the servants who's a relative of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off. So one of the servants, one of the doulos, not the huperetes, but a doulos, kind of a lower class of servant, I suppose, of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? So here we have a relative of Malchus who cut off, who saw Peter, or whose ear, Malchus, whose ear Peter cut off. Now, that doesn't mean the servant was in the garden when it happened, but the report would have been that this is the guy who cut off Malchus's ear. And so this person is familiar with the cutting off of the ear, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? Now, did I not see you in the garden with him makes it sound like this servant, this doulos, was in the garden with Yeshua and probably saw Peter do this. So Peter can't really deny that he wasn't there or that he doesn't know Yeshua. He was there fighting for him. So Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Now, some of the other gospels say that Peter like blasphemed, or he like took an oath. He swore an oath that he didn't know him, which was a lie. He did know him. So that's the third denial, and immediately the rooster crowed. And that was the prophecy. That was the prediction. Before the rooster crows, You'll deny me three times. And we've counted all three of them right here in John's gospel. Then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the praetorium, the Kratae I'm saying Praetorion, the Beit Hamimshal. I thought I was going to say Beit Hamishpat. Let's see what Dalich says. Yeah, the Beit Hamishpat, the house or the facility of judgment. Okay. So the praetorium, this is where the judgment seat was, the bema seat was. It's a Greek term for a seat that a judge sits on when he holds trial. So I think Dalich is right here. This is the Bet HaMishpat, the house of judgment. And it was early, morning. Maybe the sun hasn't come up yet. Maybe the sun has just come up, but it's early morning. So Yeshua has been up all night, no sleep last night. He was very troubled in the garden during his time of prayers. Then he's arrested. He's been answering questions and so forth. Um, so, so then they led Yeshua from Caiaphas to the praetorium, and it was early morning. They're going to bring him before Pontius Pilate. But they themselves did not go into the praetorium lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So the Pharisees and Sadducees have not eaten the Passover yet. Yeshua and his disciples have. They ate it the evening before, which has led some commentators to say the deal in the upper room wasn't even a Passover meal. That was just Holy Communion. But it wasn't a Passover meal. Well, it was a Passover meal. We've talked about the two different calendars and why Passover for the Nazarenes and Essenes and that for the Pharisees and Sadducees were a day apart because of their calendars. But here the Pharisees and the Sadducees they don't want to defile themselves by being in a Gentile building. So they'll be able to be clean and eat the Passover that coming evening. So then Pilate went out to them. So rather than having the accusers come in with the accused, Pilate went out to them. And he said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" And they answered and said to him, "If he were not an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you." Now, that is not an answer to Pilate's question. This is saying, if he weren't evil, we wouldn't have brought him to you. So he's done something evil, but we're not going to tell you what it is. Then Pilate said to them, Pilatos, Pontius Pilatus, Pilatos is a guy's name. It's probably his family name, but it is a name it's the name of a big, heavy spear made out of metal, not made out of wood, not like a lightweight javelin or something, but a heavy metal spear with a pointy tip, but with barbs in the tip, so that when it was thrust into a person, like it would be hard to get out because of the barbs, like it would rip the flesh coming out. But what it was really designed for was to be thrown into a large wooden shield. Now, this would be a shield that would cover a person's whole body. And if you've seen any movies with Roman soldiers, you see them having these big full body shields that cover their whole body, but they were made out of wood. So if you could throw a heavy metal spear into one of those big shields, it would not come out easily. It might not come out at all. And so then you'd have this huge, heavy leverage and weight on the shield, and it would cause the person holding the shield to not be able to hold it up and defend himself. So a Pilatos, so Pontius Pilate probably came from a family of, what would we call them? Pilateers, spearmen who used these spears to disarm enemy soldiers um, of their full body shields. So that's what a pilatos is. He did. He was not a pilot in the sense of he flew his airplane from Rome to Jerusalem to be the governor there. So then Pilatus said to them, "You take him, Yeshua, and judge him according to your law." Therefore the Yehudim said to him, "It is not lawful for us to put anyone to death." Now, that's an interesting sentence. First of all, the religious leaders of the Yehudim are saying to Pilate, "You're going to have to put him to death. We want you to put him to death because we don't have the authority. The authority to execute criminals has been taken away from us." So, a couple of things about that. First of all, the question is, when did it happen that the Jews lost the authority from the Romans, lost the authority to execute capital prisoners accused of capital crimes? And if you look it up online, you'll see a couple of different answers. One of those answers is about 30 AD, which is about the time that Pilate arrived. So it may have been Pilate himself who took away that authority from the Jews. So the Jews are bringing a prisoner to him, and they're saying, "This prisoner is worthy of being executed, and you have taken away our ability to execute him, so you're going to have to do it for us." Now, if the Jews had executed him, how would they have killed him? Well, according to the law of Moses, it would be by stoning, right? But according to Old Testament prophecy, it would be by piercing, by nailing him to a cross. So, I mean, we could say, in God's vast eternal plan, why did the Jews lose the ability to execute capital crimes, capital prisoners? The answer would be because, according to God's holy word of prophecy, he had to die a death on the cross. And only the Romans did that. Now, I believe they learned it from the Carthaginians and maybe the Persians also. There's some indication, even in the Bible, that the Persians crucified people. I think in Esther, it talks about hanging people on a gibbet or a gallows or something like that. That could be a description of crucifixion, but only the Romans crucified people at this time in this scenario, in this environment there in Jerusalem. So the Bible said he had to die by crucifixion, so the Romans were going to have to do it. Pilate doesn't want to do it, as we will see. So Pilate said to them, "You take him and judge him according to your law." Oh, the one thing I forgot to say about losing the power for capital punishment is that it happened much earlier, about the turn of the millennium, about the time Yeshua was born. And so Chuck Missler comments on this, that I guess there is a Jewish tradition, and I can't remember this. I'm sure he gave the source for this tradition. But the tradition is that about the time that Yeshua was born, the Romans took away the Jews' authority and ability to execute capital punishment. And according to this tradition, the high priests, when that happened, when they lost the power to execute, the high priests tore their clothes and put sackcloth on themselves and sprinkled ashes on their heads and mourned because they said the Torah, the Bible, the Old Testament had been broken. Because the Old Testament said that the scepter would not depart from between the feet or the legs of Judah, Yehuda, until Shiloh comes, which was understood to be messianic. So the scepter was the symbol of power and authority up to and including capital punishment. So Missler says that the tradition is that the high priest mourned because the scripture had been broken, because they had lost the ability to execute capital punishment, but the Messiah had not come. Now, Missler adds And this wouldn't have, this second part would not have come from Jewish tradition. He said, Missler says, what the high priest didn't know was that up in Nazareth, there was a young boy growing up who was the Messiah. So it may be true that the Jews lost the ability to execute capital punishment because the Messiah had been born in Bethlehem and was living in Nazareth. And so the scepter did depart from the Jews, but only after the Messiah had come. So Missler's word to those high priests was, no need to worry, the Messiah has come. You ought to just check him out for yourself and get yourself saved. So anyway, the religious leaders say we don't have the ability to execute criminals, that the saying of Yeshua might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he would die. Let's see, yes. The reference here that Dake gives is John 12, 32 and 33. Yeshua says, if I am lifted up from the earth, that would be by crucifixion, I will draw all the peoples to myself. And he said this signifying by what death he would die. He would be lifted up on a cross. Then Pilatus entered the praetorium and he called Yeshua and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Melech HaYehudim? Yeshua answered him, are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me? So Yeshua answers a question with a question, saying, have you come to this conclusion on your own, or are you just repeating what other people have said about me? Because he is the king of the Jews, isn't he? Pilatus answered, am I a Yehudi? Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done? Now, he's already asked Yeshua if Yeshua is a king. So here is Yeshua's answer to that question. My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Now, this is a significant verse for all the amillennialists out there in Christendom. Amillennialism is a way of interpreting prophecy that probably Augustine wasn't the first one to come up with this idea, but he was the first one to really promote it, and it really caught on, especially in the Roman Catholic Church, for many, many hundreds of years. So Augustine, when he started out in life, was a premillennialist, and he believed in the beginning that Yeshua was rejected in his first advent, but when he came for his second advent, he would set up a millennial kingdom. And so if that happened in other words, if the first advent of Yeshua ended in AD 33, we'll say 33, then Augustine expected that in the year 1033, like whenever Yeshua came, it would be a literal 1,000-year kingdom, an earthly kingdom. But then later he changed his mind about it. And it may have been from the influence of other people or who knows why. But he established what is called the allegorical method of interpreting prophecy. So when Augustine then, in the later years of his life, read Revelation 20, he said, that is not talking about a future 1,000-year messianic kingdom like I used to believe in. But that is talking about the time between the first and second advents of Yeshua. So Augustine said, we are now living in the millennial kingdom. The millennial kingdom and the church age is the same thing. But as I was saying before, when the year 1033 AD rolled around, Augustine expected the millennial kingdom, also known as the church age, to end, and then the eternal perfect state would begin, the new heavens and the new earth. Well, 1033 did roll around. And although Augustine was long dead, he was proven false. his his expectation and his prediction was proven false. But followers of teachers like Augustine are they don't easily give up their doctrinal viewpoints. So now modern day amillennialists stick with Augustine and say the kingdom uh, is going on right now. It's the church age. Um, but because he was proven wrong in 1033 AD, they say, well, the 1,000 years is not a literal 1,000 years. It's some other big number, which is kind of playing fast and loose with biblical numbers. But even the Bible plays fast and loose with biblical numbers. But amillennialists point to this view to say if you are expecting a future earthly kingdom, a kingdom of this world, then you're wrong. Because they quote Jesus as saying, my kingdom is not of this world. In other words, it's a spiritual kingdom. He says, I am the king that sits on the throne in your heart. So my kingdom is not of this world, which is pretty persuasive. And I may have just turned some of you to amillennialism. But if we continue to read here, he says, if my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. Well, one of them did, Peter did. But now my kingdom is not of this world. So this word now, my kingdom is not of this world. So let me go to the beginning of this verse, 36. Okay. Noonday. But now, hey Basilea, the kingdom, hey Eme, my kingdom, uk estin in Tuthin, is not from here. So what Jesus is saying is, if Pilate, if you're looking for an earthly kingdom, that's not the kind of kingdom I have now. My kingdom is not of this world. It's a spiritual kingdom. But now my kingdom is not from here. So that implies that in the future, his kingdom will be from here. But after his first advent, it was not an earthly kingdom. We do not have an earthly millennium going on now. And even the amillennialists say, no, the kingdom is a spiritual kingdom. It's not of this world, never will be. But that's not what Jesus says. He says, now my kingdom is not from this world, implying that someday it will be. So I'm going to keep reading Revelation 20 the same way as I always have, even as a member of a church that was predominantly amillennial. So yeah, my kingdom is not now from here. Pilatus therefore said to him, are you a king then? And Yeshua answered, you say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth, and everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. So Jesus says, you're right, I am a king, but his kingship could be a spiritual one, ruling on the throne of our hearts, which is what the amillennialists say. I think what Jesus is saying is, I came here to be a king, but my own people have rejected me. As you, Pilate, can plainly see by what's going on right in front of your eyes. So the kingdom is not going to come until until my people say, do you know what they have to say? Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that will happen in the future when he comes for his second advent. That is prophesied. So you say rightly that I am a king for this cause I was born, and for that cause I have come into this world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And Pilatus said to him, what is truth? And that is the big question that the world's population in this day and age is asking. Now, when I was a young kid, uh, moral relativism was really the most significant influence of the culture. So you would hear people say things like, well, that kind of behavior may be wrong for you, but it's not wrong for me. I think it's perfectly fine. Like sexual immorality. A lot of people that were my age when I was growing up thought sexual immorality, at least what the Bible calls sexual immorality, having sex with people you're not married, they felt like that was perfectly fine. Now, according to the Bible, it's not perfectly fine. It's a death penalty sin. Uh, but relativism says, well, if you think it's wrong, that's fine for you. I won't argue with you, but for me, I think it's fine, and so I'm going to go ahead and keep doing it. And that brought on the Playboy philosophy and the voluminous amounts of pornographic material that was available. When I was a young kid, you could get Playboy magazines and Penthouse and others a little more graphic than that. So it was magazines. But then they come out with videos like pornographic movies that they showed at theaters, and and then with the advent of the internet, everybody, as one of my teachers and mentors says, um, everybody carries around their uh, pornography. I'm trying to show you my cell phone. Hold up my cell phone. He says everybody carries their porn dealer in their pocket, and you can look at it anytime you want to, and in a few pressed buttons, and you've got porno right in front of you. So that is kind of an indication that we have lost the moral war. So Pilate is he's kind of talking from a moral relativism uh, perspective. Well, what is truth? What you say is truth, what the Jews say is truth, what I say is truth, may be very different things. Who's to say? And Yeshua, what this is not necessarily what Yeshua is going to say, but what he believes is, well, God is the moral arbiter. He is the one who tells us what's right and wrong. Um, I tell you what truth is, says Yeshua. And when he had said this, he went out to the Yehudim and he said to them, I find no fault in him at all. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Do you therefore want me to release to you the King of the Jews? So I'll release Jesus here, the Nazarene, to you. Then they cried out again, saying, not this man, not Yeshua, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a robber. Now, um, that brings us to the end of the chapter, and we're going to quit here. But I want to talk a little bit about Barabbas. So I'm going to go to a different tab I have on this same Bible software, and we're going to go to Matthew 27, verse 16, which is the same text we've been reading except in John's gospel. So Matthew 27:16, at that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Our Greek says, Akon, they had Tate there, Desmion, a prisoner, Episemon, notorious or noteworthy, Legomenon, who was called, look at this, Yezun. That's Jesus' name. His first name was Jesus, Baraban. Barabbas, Jesus Barabbas. Now, in this fancy Greek New Testament we have access to what is called the apparatus. So down in the information window at the bottom of the page, this little circle here, right before the square brackets and the name Yezun or Jesus, the little circle means it's omitted from most manuscripts. It's in this one. It is included in brackets in the Nestle Aland 28th edition New Testament. So it is omitted in Aleph, which is the Sinaiticus manuscript, A, which is the Alexandritis manuscript, and B, which is the Vaticanus manuscript. These are the three most significant. And the name Yezun is not in any of those. It's not in any of these family of manuscripts. It is not in the majority text, so don't expect to see it in your King James version, okay? It is not in the Latin Bible. It's not in the Syriac Bible, or not in some of the Syriac Bibles. The Syriac Bible is very old, but it is in Theta, which is a manuscript of the 9th century AD, which is quite a bit not as old as the Aleph A and B. Family 1 is 10th or 11th century. 700, I think, is 11th century. 844, I couldn't tell you much about that, but it is in some of the Syriac manuscripts. So there's very weak textual evidence for the name Jesus being attached to Barabbas. If we go to the modern Hebrew New Testament here, let me pull my face out of the way. Yeshua. Here's the name Yeshua. Yeshua in our modern Hebrew New Testament, Israeli Bible Society. Bar Abba. So what do these names mean? Well, Yeshua is the name of our Savior, but it was also a popular name at the time. So it means salvation. Yeshua means salvation in Hebrew. Bar Abban means in Aramaic, son of a father or son of the father. Abba actually would be the father. So it would be a son of the, so the criminal is named Jesus, son of the Father. And our Lord and Savior is named Jesus, son of the Father. So if Yezun is authentic, and it was in the inspired Greek New Testament, the manuscript evidence for that is very weak, but it's possible. Here it is showing up, in spite of the lack of evidence, in the Nestle Aland 28th edition, and also in the modern Hebrew New Testament. So I went through all that spiel just to share with you that if the name Yeshua in connection with Barabbas is there, you have two guys by the same name or the same title, and Pilate's going to release one of them. So I'll avoid the spoiler and not tell you which one they release. We will talk about that when we get to John chapter 19. Let me go ahead and give you a New Testament blessing as we sign off here and end this video. Chesed Adonenu Yeshua HaMashiach ve'achavat ha'Elohim v'chitchabarut baruach HaKodesh im chulchem. Amen, which means the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the communion of the Holy Spirit be with you all. So shalom, shalom, my friends. I hope we'll see you next time for John chapter 19.